Okay, so now we explain the things that we've learned in a better way so we can see how fractally the perspectives and the cycles in front of you, so basically these two right here, how they operate together and where momentum based MBs, accumulation based MBs find themselves in an overall move before we move on to anything else. So, as we now understand, we understand the characteristics themselves behind what an accumulation MB might look like, where it might happen. And we also understand the characteristics behind a momentum based MB and where they might happen. So now what's interesting is we can bridge the gap. We can put these together. And what I mean by that is once we start to recognize that a validation timeframes, momentum MB, because oftentimes what we're going to see on a validation timeframe for the cycle to play out on an entry timeframe is moves that are drastic, that are quick, that are proving that there is composite orders behind the actual move. So think back to some of the earlier teachings that we're now really kind of focusing in on. Well, we have been overall focusing on them, but remember, the main thing we're doing, or in a theoretical world, we are learning to know what the composite operator wants to do. How are composite orders entering the market, and are they worth continuing to follow for ourselves as traders? So, given this information, on a validation time frame, moves that start to become quick and start delivering, let's say, with momentum or with quite good movement, and then pausing on the 10 or 20 or sometimes a little bit below, well, they in themselves are acting as what? Since we understand that for the most part, characteristically, a accumulation-based MB is one that tends to occur after price is flushed or is flushing out to maybe the 10, the 20, or just under them. What would it be the case if a MB was to not flush out necessarily, but basically take a pause or go sideways on a rising moving average like the 10 or the 20? Well, as you already know, characteristically, that would show us a momentum-based MB. And a momentum-based MB tells us what? It means that by the time we move through its potential high, right? So if price moves higher and then pauses, the time that we move through the high or through an MB within it, what's oftentimes going to happen is it might make for a little move and then fall off or go for a crazy blow up. And funny enough, what we're actually doing as traders and the way we bridge the gap between the validation and the entry time frame now is we recognize that what we're doing is we're looking for validation time frame momentum based MBs. So we're looking for the proof of momentum already on the validation time frame, and then we are proving those orders. We are proving the fact the composite operator is truly behind the move by studying how this momentum MB is created, which oftentimes is created how? Through the lens of the entry time frame. So now, with this newfound knowledge, with your understanding of characteristics and how they interconnect together, let's look at just a few examples of the stuff we've already studied. So let me just go ahead and open up some trades that I've traded this week personally. Because again, everything I teach is stuff that I do every single week, no matter what. So here's some lower time frame stuff I personally traded. This was 30-second based entries, where what I did is, and I think we went over this example already, but nonetheless, what I simply did is I traded the cycle and the double MB that formed within the cycle right here. So price had gone through some kind of major flush. Beyond that major flush, price started some kind of stage 2 to the top side. Through that stage 2, price had a new flush that again flushed down below the 10 and 20 EMA in this case. And from there, it began to build MBs. And I simply entered through the formation of what I believe to be the true accumulation double MB. MB1, MB2, and I had looked to enter this. Now, of course, any of you watching this should be able to determine that, yes, there might be an MB1, MB2 here. This in itself could be a valid entry. FMB1, FFMB2, price taps you in, and then goes for a beautiful trade. Nonetheless, this is the trade I took right here, this double MB, this accumulation-based double MB. Now, what I want to do is I want to quickly move back here, and I want to put a green circle highlighting this price action here, because the question now is where and how does the interaction of the entry timeframe cycle now directly correspond to the interaction of the validation timeframe cycle, and how do they look across the board? So before I even look at a higher time frame, and assuming that my E time frame is the 30-second, my entry time frame is the 30-second, a multiple of 6 puts us at around a V of 3 minutes. And as we understand, because traders are unique, traders are a little bit different, and what you see might be different based on who you are, you can, of course, use anywhere from a 3 minute to a 5 minute to maybe even a 7 minute to a 10 minute. It's mainly preference. And personally, I'm at the moment for my lower time frame entries using a multiple of basically a 5 minute. So I'm using a 30-second and a 5 minute to enter my E and V. So if I'm entering a 30-second chart, I'm mainly paying attention to the validation time frame of a 5 minute to see where I am. Okay. So before I even step up to a 5 minute chart here or a 3 minute chart, because both are completely valid, let me actually put both, because there are times where I'll literally look at both just to see if one makes more sense than the other, right? I look for opportunity if it's present. So before I even do that, and understand this is an accumulation-based MB, what we should now understand is if we were to turn on a multi-time frame average. So right now what I did is I put an entry time frame of 30 seconds in and an MA time frame of a 5 minute chart in, right? And you guys can access this for free on TradingView by just finding METAFX averages multi-time frame. If I just do this, right, what we also know characteristically, right, is that the flush of an entry time frame is usually going to come to the 5, 10, or 20 validation timeframes MA. Similarly, if this was a 3 minute, if we made that a 3 minute, you can see the same thing met. Regardless of the validation time frame we use, you can see there's similarity in between the characteristics of what price is going to do within a cycle delivery. Okay, so that's what's happening here. It's meeting the characteristics that we're normally going to look for. And funny enough, characteristically, if this is an accumulation-based MB entry that I might be trading or that I'm looking for as an opportunity to take higher, what do you think this high and the action inside of here is going to act as on a validation time frame? Well, this is where we get into stage delivery. So, back to normal stage 1, stage 2, stage 1, stage 2, stage 1, stage 2, that is more fractal because of the move that we're looking at, because the validation time frame looks at a zoomed out version of the entry time frame's orders, of course. And funny enough, what we see is momentum based MBs were basically, for the most part, and now sometimes you might trade on accumulation-based MB. Some of you might label this as an accumulation-based MB based on where it's coming from, or if the move looked something like, let me show this very clearly. If the move prior looked something, maybe like this, right? Maybe this is now acting as a reaccumulation. This might be that accumulation-based MB1. This might be that accumulation-based MB2, where you might start looking for entry time frame-based entries, because inside of here is going to be what? This action on the left right here, right? And then from there, what happens? As price begins to move, it begins to create new MBs, which share the characteristics of what? Momentum-based MBs. So what this leads us to understand in a real life setting, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to go like this, right? Because this is now part of a potential delivery. I'm going to just keep this in mind here. I'm going to get rid of these so they're not in the way. So what we now understand is this accumulation-based entry that we can draw a green circle around just so we can see it very, very clearly. When we move to the validation time frame of likely a 3-minute or a 5-minute, what we're going to see is momentum-based MBs, whether they're coming from out of a reaccumulation or out of already a prior large just push up like this, right? What we're going to see is momentum-based MBs that create that move. So that is why, one, it's important to understand what kind of entries you actually want to trade, but two, to understand how these characteristics play with each other across timeframes. Because once you understand if you're in an accumulation-based MB, in a momentum-based MB, and how it's going to deliver, you have the precedent to decide if it's worth trading something or walking away from it completely, right? So when we look at this right here, and I go to a 5-minute, we are going to see what? Price will be pulling back likely to a rising 10 or 20 moving average, creating a momentum-based MB. Let's go to a 5-minute first, and I'm going to show you this on a 5-minute and a 3-minute to prove this case. So what do you see? Once again, in this specific scenario, what you have is a move that, started a crazy, crazy move, went and kind of collapsed down, started making actually a reaccumulation, went through accumulation-based MBs on a validation time frame, MB1, MB2, potentially, pushed higher, and from there, this high, the same high we all kind of looked at just now in a lower time frame, inside of this area where price has now moved higher, pulled back to a rising 10 and 20 moving average, it's doing what? It's creating a momentum-based MB. And the creation of a momentum-based MB is the early precedent for accumulation MBs and a flush and a cycle on the entry time frame. So when we move inside of here, as you just saw, we get major flush into a stage 2, into a flush, meeting the characteristics of accumulation MBs, into the double MB rule, or the setup of double MB that leads to accumulation MBs, that then leads to inside momentum-based MBs that deliver price into new flushes, that deliver into new accumulation-based MBs, that deliver into new momentum-based MBs, momentum-based MBs, momentum-based MBs, until new flushes, into new accumulation MBs, into what we would suspect to be continuation and momentum-based MBs, and continue and continue and continue, right? That is the interaction that's actually happening between understanding first the characteristics of momentum MBs and accumulation MBs, and then putting together the E and the V and understanding that price is undergoing these cycles multiple times, where the cycle to entry or the overall major flush and stuff like that is most important on the entry time frame, and the validation time frame is kind of the almost blockade that forces you to wait for clear action. So for instance, just looking at this action, we know, right, that good entries on the entry time frame, so a 30-second, are going to happen where? Inside of this momentum-based MB, right? Price goes through this accumulation, is already powerful, through this accumulation-based MB, maybe momentum-based MB, through this momentum-based MB, through this momentum-based MB, because what's happening inside of all this action here? What's happening is you're getting a flush to a validation timeframes 10, 20, right? Which is overall the characteristic of momentum, but then on a lower time frame, and if we added a 5 EMA to this, right, there's your flush down into the 5, the 10, or the 20 as a characteristic of the E to the V, because they work synonymously, they work together. Let's turn that off. So when I go through the 30-second here, I know this high is acting as what? The next run on the next momentum-based MB, which means the setups inside of here are going to be flushes followed by MB setups. And what do you see? Price flushes to the 10 and 20 EMA, or if we got rid of that, flushes into the 5, 10, or 20. And again, if we play around with this, because we can make it a 3-minute, remember, flushes into the 5, right? In this case, to the 10. Flushes down and does what? FMB1, FMB2, or MB1, MB2, or MB1, or FMB1, FFMB2, okay? Over and over and over again. The exact same move. The double MB that creates the next move that takes out the next momentum-based MB of a validation time frame, but is created through what? The initial flush, the cycle, the accumulation-based MB and the characteristics of it that then lead to momentum-based MBs that run the momentum-based MB of a higher time frame for the purpose of doing what? Either starting a crazy trend or collapsing into new cycle flushes to start new moves. And this is a direct example from a trade I personally took. Not this one right here. I did not take this trade, but directly from an example I personally took in reference to this setup this week, where all I did, right, was trade the overall setup of momentum MBs into this move. And any of you asking are completely correct that if you were on a 3-minute, for instance, let me go to a 3-minute on this given market, on a 3-minute, you could have traded inside of here, but it would have been a lot harder because, you know, price hadn't proven itself. And then on a 3-minute, you can see this momentum-based MB right here created this accumulation-based MB on an entry time frame, which means this was a flush or major flush, running all those characteristics that we normally see. This right here was the same thing. That's a momentum-based MB that likely on a lower time frame, 30-second, created some kind of potential double MB accumulation-based MB setup, and then started delivering into momentum MBs to run this momentum. It's just another momentum MB, another momentum MB, another momentum MB. And what you might notice is if you start to count these, right, maybe something like 1, 2, this kind of all access 2 because it happened in one area, 3, 4, or this all counts as 3, and then maybe this is a 4th, which is why I traded it again. And you can see I actually took some break evens and losses, or I took one loss, right? What you'll see is there's this generality to the fractal stages that tend to deliver once a move is set, right? We get these fractal 1 into 2, 1 into 2, 1 into 2, and maybe 1 into 2. We have that happen about 4 times. And that's usually how moves tend to deliver because, and the reason, the 4 is not this special number. The reason it happens is because usually the first or the second, or kind of the first takes the precedent of an accumulation MB or a momentum MB. The second, third, and fourth act as momentum MBs. And by the time you've created basically 3, 4, or more momentum MBs, anyone or the composite operator that wanted to be positioned or wants to be positioned for the long is already long-term positioned or has been positioned for a long time, which means by that point, it's either smooth sailing for more profit taking or new failure, new setups, new momentum-based opportunity, and it resets. So that is why you had this label on here in front of you of this kind of thought process of 1, 2, 3, 4. Generally 4 kind of fractal stages, sometimes very far apart from each other, sometimes way too far apart from each other. Sometimes the 1 and 2 are so close that it counts as a 1, right? So it's not always perfect, which again is something that you should all understand about trading because, well, trading is not about this perfection in terms of everything lines up exactly. Instead, it's an understanding that's then used to decide if taking a risk on a certain move or a certain opportunity is worth it, right? And then you have these moves occur. And that is how we bridge the gap. This is the initial bridge. So, this is how we're bridging the gap between the entry time frame and the cycle of the entry time frame and what generally is happening, what we're looking for, and the validation time frame in terms of what it's generally going to do, how it's going to move. And this might be the first time that you're starting to see that for the most part, the moves I want to look for are the ones that are already literally proving that money is behind them in a very, very big way. I'm going to show you some examples of that right now. Then we're going to stop and move on to more examples after this to continue bridging this gap between the E and the V, understanding how to use it better. And of course, if you show up to webinars, you'll see even more examples of this from my own trading at the moment of exactly what I'm doing on whatever timeframes I'm doing this on. So if I show you some examples of trades that I have taken, right, here's Duo, like I said, and you can see where the trades are taken based on the V timeframe. Here's MSTR. This is something I took on a higher time frame. This is on a higher time frame. I entered this off of a 15-minute entry, which you might notice happened as a accumulation-based MB. I entered through the accumulation-based MBs, and I'm now in this trade. But if now I multiply 15 by 6, which was around 90 minutes, and if I go to a 90-minute chart, what you'll see is the entry itself and when it was taken was based on the momentum MB right here, right? Where price had went through some kind of flush, accumulation, started making some kind of maybe accumulation or reaccumulation, had this MB1, MB2, accumulation-based MBs, and maybe that can count as your first fractal stage. And this would count as your second fractal stage. So right now, if you were to ask me, what do I expect out of this? I expect either continuation, maybe a little pause, maybe a third fractal stage, maybe a pause, a fourth fractal stage, and then completion that's then going to lead to a major flush or complete failure on behalf of the market that either decides to move later or just fails down. And this is how I set the precedent for any given move in the market. This is, for instance, a E of a 15-minute and a V of a 90-minute used, right? The exact same concept, but notice what's happening on the validation time frame, notice what it's doing, and then notice what the entry time frame is doing in regards to major flush, stage 2, flush, double MB, flush, entry through double MB. This is the one I chose to take. What's the next step? Likely a flush into the double MB or accumulation MBs that start a move, some accumulation MBs throughout the move, maybe a small flush here that then either ends up failing or ends up going for a crazy run that I can close most of my position and profit on and move on to the next trade. So that's another example of a trade that follows these exact steps. Tesla. This is another trade that I'm also in. Similar approach, a little bit different in regards to where this setup actually occurred, right? So if you take a look at the setup, this was kind of this MB1. This is acting as maybe MB2 or MB2. Now, looking at this is a little bit momentum based when I'm looking at this entry. The likely double MB was probably here and here as the FFMB, right? So this was probably the better trade. However, I wasn't in any moves. The setup itself at the time looked kind of clear to me. It was end of day, so I took it. So I'm assuming, or trying to assume, that this is an accumulation-based MB as part of this double MB, and this is going to result in, hopefully, right, a stage 2 move that then creates some momentum MBs here, comes back down, maybe flushes, and then starts a continuation move, right? But again, if we then look at the 90-minute chart in response to the entry I took, take a look at where it is and what it's actually doing. Price goes through kind of that flush, starts its accumulation MBs down here, makes a drastic big move here, right? Big move, starts going sideways, and this is now creating what? An accumulation-based MB that I'm trading into through the, momentum-based MB that I'm trading into with the lower time from accumulation-based MBs to get myself positioned into, hopefully, right, if we want to start counting again, maybe this is 1 or this is 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 up here, or whatever it wants to do, right, into hopefully a crazy move, okay? Very nice. Very, very nice. Now, EVGO. This is something I traded this week as well. This is something I traded on a 30-second entry, lower time from entry. You can see I took 2 losses. That's perfectly fine. You're going to get very used to seeing me take losses as well, because unlike a lot of the shit that you learn online, you know, I actually trade for myself, which means that I actually do take losses, and very good ones. And losses are the only thing that make me money, because, hey, if you don't take losses, you can't take wins, right? After all. And if you notice again, on the 30-second, what's happening? You have accumulation-based MBs that I missed. You know, I missed these, but then accumulation-based MBs that I entered, accumulation-based MBs right here that I missed, accumulation-based MBs right here that I entered, accumulation-based MBs down here that I missed. Same thing here, but there was not really a double MB. This is one of those examples where you have FMB1, FMB2 as a candle, and then price starts making momentum MBs, but those are harder for me to trade, so I ignored it, right? But again, if I was to jump to the 3-minute or the 5-minute of this move here, what are we going to see? Well, let's go to a 5-minute or a 3-minute, doesn't really matter. What we're going to see, once again, is a validation time frame that has started to continuously make momentum-based MBs, something along the lines of maybe 1, 2, 3, and you can see I entered in the vision that this was probably 3, and maybe this was actually 4, but I entered this one thinking this was maybe 4, and you can see as I entered, I took some losses, and that's all good, right? So I ended up missing that move, then it started a new one, 1, 2, 3, and then kind of failed back down, and nothing happened going forward. But this is what I base this trade on through the exact same model and cycle that you are seeing right here. And again, showing and further showing you how prices operate, but also bridging that gap between how and why the momentum-based MBs and accumulation-based MBs are important, and how they interact with each other across timeframes. Because now what you should be understanding is that the momentum-based MBs and these ones that kind of occur quicker across these rising averages, with the averages kind of moving higher, right, with a lot of power, with the composite operator clearly buying it up and moving in that direction, those pauses are indeed those flushes and major flushes that create the market cycle of the entry time frame, which lead to the opportunities available to you, which are the demand-based entries that can be made available through the buy stops, sell stops, and all that other stuff, right? And we're going to talk about entries in more depth very soon as well. So this is that bridging the gap of the E and the V and how they're interacting together with, as you saw just now, a few examples.